Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to, on behalf of New Zealand, first welcome the wandering minstrel of a Trade Minister back to this country for a rare visit to this Parliament. Unfortunately, he's leaving now, but he needs to get his facts right. Mr Speaker, Mr Grosser just made the comment in the budget debate that he said he was just recently in Sweden on one of his junkets to try and get a job with the WTO, spending $250,000 of taxpayers' money trying to get a job for himself. And he said, Mr Speaker, that in Sweden he was told that their youth unemployment rate was 25.1%, he said, 25.1%, and they were appalled in Sweden and so envious of New Zealand. Well, I've got news for Mr Grosser, and I've got news which are hard facts. He needs to spend a little bit more time in this country and a little bit less time on junket trips around the world, because the unemployment rate for 15 to 19-year-olds in this country, according to the New Zealand Household Labour Force Survey, March 2013, guess what the percentage of unemployed in the 15 to 19 youth age group? Do any of the National Party members know what that is? Would you take a guess? Would it be close to the 25.1% of Sweden? Would any of you know? Well, actually, the figure is 25.6% in New Zealand of 15 to 19-year-olds. 25.6% unemployed 15 to 19-year-olds. So here we have Mr Grosser going on about how terrible it is in Sweden, and they have a rate of 25.1% for youth unemployment, and saying how wonderful New Zealand is, when in actual fact New Zealand's youth unemployment is higher. So, Mr Grosser, I suggest you spend a little bit more time in this country and a little bit less time wandering around the world and learn about the facts of your own country. In terms of other unemployment of the next age group, 20 to 24-year-olds are 10.9%, 25 to 29-year-olds are 7.1%. This is appalling. This means that all our young people, you are talking one in every 4 or 5 people of youth age in this country out of work. That's appalling. And if you look at the regions around this country, and you look at Northland with an average of 10% unemployment, you look at the Bay of Plenty with 8% unemployment, Gisborne Hawke's Bay with 8.4% unemployment, the Manawatu-Wanganui area with 7.7% unemployment. These are not good figures at all, Mr Speaker. And we constantly hear the national government saying how they're trying to get unemployment down, when in actual fact, out in the provinces, things are pretty grim. And it's even worse if you're a Maori, Pacifica person, or from the Middle East, Latin American, African areas. Maori are currently 13.9% of our unemployed people in this country, 13.9. Pacifica people are even worse off at 15.2%, and those of Middle Eastern, Latin American and African origin are 10.9%. But it was interesting, Mr Speaker, in the papers on the weekend, a survey of National Party voters said that they weren't that affected by unemployment. Not many people in their families were affected by unemployment. They didn't know too many people suffering from unemployment. So wasn't that interesting that the favoured few, the rich cats that were referred to before by Mr Grosser, they seem to be exempt from this. And it does seem that the anointed ones, those that support the National Party, certainly seem to be doing well out of this government, while the middle class, good, everyday, good, hard-working, average Kiwi is not. There's nothing to promote growth in this budget, Mr Speaker. There's nothing for jobs or to lift incomes for good, hard-working Kiwis. This budget does nothing for provincial New Zealand. In fact, it attacks provincial New Zealand. We heard last week where provincial New Zealand will be paying an extra 3 cents a litre from the 1st of July, which will rise by another 3 cents for the next 2 years to 9 cents a litre. So people in the likes of those areas with high unemployment in the likes of Northland, in the likes of Gisborne Hawke's Bay, in the likes of Manawatu, Wanganui and the Bay of Plenty, they're not going to be seeing anything for their extra 3 to 9 cents a litre on their fuel tax. They simply are just going to be paying more money to put petrol in their family car, in their work vehicle each week to get to and from work or to take their family out and about. They're not going to see anything more from it because all the roads of National Party significance, happen to be north of Hamilton in the main. They are, apart from a little bit in Wellington, a little bit in Wellington, a little bit in Christchurch, but to all those provincial areas, hundreds of kilometres away, they will see next to nothing. And Mr. Speaker, what have we had from this government apart from 5 years of tinkering around the edges? We've had a lot of broken promises, and I quote, in July 2007, the then Leader of the Opposition, John Key, said, and I quote, "That would be a fundamental purpose of our government, to narrow the wage gap between ourselves and Australia and to grow local wages in New Zealand." That's what he promised as the Leader of the Opposition, July 2007. And the reality today is that the wage gap with Australia has increased by $58.18 a week. So 5 years later, he hasn't followed through on his promises as the Leader of the Opposition. In fact, we are worse off compared to Australia. On the 27th of November 2007, as the then Prime Minister, John Key, he said, "We're here today at..." he was still the Leader of the Opposition in 2007, he didn't become until 2008. He said as Leader of the Opposition, "We're here today at Westpac Stadium," and many of you will recall him standing in the middle of Westpac Stadium. "It holds nearly 35,000 people, and believe it or not, the equivalent of this entire stadium and more leaves every year to permanently live in Australia." And then Mr. Key went on to say, "I'm convinced we can give them a reason and a purpose to stay in New Zealand, and that's why I want to be New Zealand's next Prime Minister," he said. Well, what happened? And this was also the promise. We've got an agenda which is about the economy, it's about building opportunities, it's about stopping 80,000 people leaving a year to other parts of the world, he said on the 27th of August 2008 leading up to the election. The reality, 5 years later, is that 126,669 New Zealanders have left for Australia under John Key. So the promises as Leader of the Opposition and coming into government have not been fulfilled. As to asset sales, and much of this budget was built on sale of assets and trying to balance the books and trying to come into surplus in a few years' time, on the 12th of October 2008, Mr. Key had my commitments to you. These were his commitments to you. He said, "I'm not interested in selling assets. I'm all about building assets." So isn't it interesting that in 2008 you can talk about building assets, but in actual fact, the whole agenda was to sell assets. He then went on to say in his personal commitment card, "I personally guarantee that we will maintain and build New Zealand's asset base by not selling Kiwi Bank or any other state-owned company." The reality, however, Mr. Speaker, was that National has sold off Mighty River Power, selling nearly half of something that all New Zealanders, including every person in this room, already owned, and they've moved it over to the wealthy people who could afford to buy the shares, and the 2.5% of New Zealanders who are now better off as a result. Mr. Speaker, also Mr. Key said on the 30th of January 2007, he said, "I have no intention of being a Prime Minister who tackles only the easy and convenient issues, but I can tell you that dealing with the problems of our growing underclass is a priority for National, both in opposition and in government." He said that as Leader of the Opposition. The reality today, Mr. Speaker, and under this budget, the reality is that the underclass has grown with 32,873 more children living in benefit-dependent households during the time of this government than when they came into office. Mr. Speaker, this budget has not delivered for the underclass. It has not delivered for low and middle income New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, this is a very disappointing budget.
Speaker. I call the honourable member to Iraroa Flavel. Tēnā koe, Mr.